There is a particular kind of silence that comes from a phone that used to ring every single day. I noticed it on day 3. By day 6, that silence had a sound of its own. A low, constant hum in the back of my skull that never let me sleep right, never let me eat right, never let me be the Marine I was supposed to be on a base 7,000 miles from home. I am Tristan Cole. I have been a United States Marine for 11 years. I have sat in places most people will never imagine and kept my hands steady when everything around me was falling apart. Nothing prepared me for what was happening to my wife while I was gone. Brooke and I had been married for 2 years when I deployed. She was 26, soft-spoken, the kind of woman who said thank you to waiters and meant it, who cried at other people's weddings, who kept every letter I ever wrote her in a shoebox under our bed, because she said throwing them away felt like throwing away a piece of us. When I got my deployment orders, we sat at our kitchen table and made the decision together. She would stay with my mother, Kendra, while I was gone. It made sense on paper. My mother had the space. Brooke wouldn't be alone in our small apartment for 9 months. Family looking after family. That's what we told ourselves. My mother lived in a big house on the edge of town with my 4 sisters still living at home. Daphne, the oldest of the 4, and the quietest. Giselle, sharp-tongued, always had an opinion. Morgan, the one who laughed the loudest and meant the least by it. And Ophelia, the youngest, barely 20, still finding her place in that household. I grew up in that house. I knew its walls, its creaky 3rd stair, the smell of my mother's kitchen. I did not know, until it was almost too late, what those walls were capable of hiding. The first 2 months of deployment, Brooke wrote me letters almost every single day. Real letters, pen on paper, the kind you fold into thirds and seal with your own hands. She told me about helping my mother in the garden, about Sunday dinners where Morgan made everyone laugh until their stomachs hurt, about a small joint account she and I kept for emergencies, growing slowly with both our incomes. Then, around month 3, something in her letters started to shift. Nothing dramatic, nothing I could point to directly, just shorter, quieter, less about the garden and Sunday dinners, and more about logistics. The house is fine. Everyone is fine. Don't worry about me. I want you to remember that phrase. Don't worry about me. People who are actually fine rarely have to say it twice in every letter. Her last letter arrived on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were mail days on base, and I had learned to live for them. She wrote about finding something in our joint account records that confused her. Money moving in small amounts she didn't recognize, transferred out before she could ask anyone about it. She said she was going to bring it up with my mother, said it was probably nothing, said she didn't want to make it a bigger deal than it needed to be. I'll let you know what she says, the letter ended. I love you. Come home to me. I read that letter 4 times before I folded it and put it in my own pocket, the way I did with every letter she sent. I never got another one. At first I told myself it was the mail system. Deployment mail is unreliable. Letters get lost, delayed, sometimes take 3 weeks to land for no reason at all. I gave it 10 days before I let myself worry. Then I called. 3 rings, then voicemail. Hey, it's Brooke. Leave a message. Her voice bright and easy, recorded months before any of this started. I called again the next day, same thing. I called my mother's house line. Kendra answered on the 2nd ring, voice warm, almost too warm. Tristan, sweetheart, how are you holding up over there? I'm fine, Mom. I've been trying to reach Brooke. Is she around? A small pause, small enough that on any other day I might not have noticed it. She's resting, honey. She's had a little stomach bug going around. You know how she gets when she's under the weather, doesn't want anyone to see her like that. Can you just put her on for a second? I won't keep her long. She's sleeping right now, Tristan. I don't want to wake her. I'll have her call you the second she's up. She did not call. Not that day, not the next. By day 6 of silence, I had called that house 11 times. 11 times my mother or one of my sisters answered with some version of the same story. She's resting. She's not feeling well. She's in the shower. She just stepped out. 11 different small reasons why the woman I married could not come to the phone for even 30 seconds to tell me she was alive. I sat on the edge of my bunk that night with my satellite phone in my hand, staring at the small cracked screen, and I felt something settle into my chest that I recognized from exactly 2 other moments in my career. The feeling right before something goes very wrong, when every instinct in your body is screaming at you, and your training is the only thing keeping you from running blind into the dark. I had one civilian friend back home I trusted completely. A man named Hunter, who I'd known since high school, who lived 20 minutes from my mother's house, and owed me more favors than either of us could count. I called him at 2 in the morning, my time. Didn't care what time it was for him. He answered on the first ring, voice thick with sleep. "Tristan, everything okay, man?" "No," I said. "I need you to go check on Brooke. Today, right now if you can." A pause, then the sound of him sitting up, suddenly awake. "What's going on?" "I don't know yet," I said. "That's exactly the problem." I hung up the phone and sat in the dark of my bunk, staring at the small folded letter still in my jacket pocket. "I love you, come home to me." And I made myself a promise I intended to keep no matter what it cost me. Whatever was happening inside that house, I was going to find out the truth, and whoever was responsible was going to learn exactly what kind of man they had been hiding her from. Hunter got to the house by 10 o'clock that morning. He told me everything later, piece by piece, but the way he described it, standing on that porch, knocking on a door he'd walked through 100 times as a teenager, stuck with me more than almost anything else in this whole story. He said she looked thinner than he remembered, tired around the eyes in a way that didn't match a 28-year-old woman who, by all appearances, lived a quiet, comfortable life. "Hey Daphne, I'm looking for Brooke. Tristan asked me to check in on her." Daphne's eyes flicked behind her, into the house, before they came back to him. "She's not up for visitors right now." "Is she sick?" Tristan said. "Your mom mentioned a stomach bug." Something like that. Daphne's hand stayed on the edge of the door, not quite closing it, not quite opening it further either. "She's resting. I'll tell her you stopped by. Can I just see her for a minute?" "I won't stay long." "Hunter," my mother's voice came from somewhere inside, sharp enough that Daphne actually flinched. A moment later Kendra appeared behind her daughter, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel, smiling the kind of smile that doesn't reach anywhere near the eyes. "So good of you to stop by, sweetheart. Brooke's just under the weather. I'll have her call Tristan myself once she's feeling better." "I told him I'd see her with my own eyes," Hunter said. "He's pretty worried." "Well, you can tell him there's nothing to worry about." Her hand came to rest on the door, gentle, final. "We've got it handled." The door closed. Hunter stood on that porch for a long moment before he walked back to his car. He called me that night, and I could hear in his voice that something had shifted in him. "Tristan, I don't like this," he said. "Your mom, the way she talked, it wasn't worried mother talk. It was managing a situation talk. You know the difference." I did know the difference. I'd heard plenty of people manage situations in my life, in rooms far more dangerous than my mother's kitchen, and the tone Hunter was describing was unmistakable. "Did you see Brooke at all? Even for a second?" "No." Daphne kept the door barely open. "Your mom shut it fast." A pause. "There's something else." When the door was open, I heard something. Real quiet. Almost nothing. "What?" Sounded like it came from below the floor, like underneath the house. He let that sit there a moment. "You guys have a basement?" I felt my stomach drop somewhere I couldn't name. "Yeah," I said slowly, "we do." I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. I lay on my bunk running through every detail of every letter Brooke had sent me in the last 3 months, looking for anything I might have missed. The shorter sentences, the repeated "don't worry about me," the unexplained money she'd mentioned just before everything went quiet, money, a confrontation she planned to have with my mother, and then silence. I thought about my mother's voice on the phone. "She's resting, she's sleeping, she just stepped out." 11 times, 11 small lies stacked on top of each other so smoothly that if I hadn't known Brooke as well as I did, I might have believed every single one. I called Hunter back at 4 o'clock in the morning. "I need you to go back," I said, "tonight if you can. Don't knock this time." "What am I looking for?" "That basement," I said. "There's a small window on the side near the garden. I used to climb out of it when I was a kid sneaking out at night. If something's wrong, that's where I'd start." Hunter was quiet for a second. "Tristan, if I'm wrong about this, if this is nothing, if you're wrong, you tell me there's nothing there, and I apologize to my mother for ever doubting her." My voice came out steadier than I expected given how unsteady I felt inside. "But if you're right." I didn't finish that sentence. I didn't need to. "I'll go tonight," Hunter said. "I'll call you the second I know something." The next 20 hours were the longest of my life, and I have lived through hours that involved gunfire. I went through my duties on base like a man operating on autopilot, present enough to function, distant enough that one of my squad mates asked me twice if I was feeling all right. I told him I was fine. He didn't believe me. I didn't blame him. I kept that letter in my pocket the entire day. I love you. Come home to me. I thought about the woman who wrote those words. Soft-spoken, gentle. The kind of person who said thank you to waiters and meant it. The kind of person who, when she found something wrong with our money, didn't shout or accuse. She simply planned to ask gently, the way she did everything. I thought about what kind of household would answer that gentleness by locking a door and feeding me lies for 9 straight days. And somewhere underneath the fear, underneath the helplessness of being 7,000 miles away, while something happened to the person I loved most, something else was starting to take shape inside me. No panic. Focus. The same focus that had carried me through 11 years of situations where panic would have gotten people killed. My phone rang at 11:52 that night, base time, Hunter's name on the screen. I answered before the first ring finished, and the moment I heard his voice, low, careful, shaking in a way I had never once heard from him in 20 years of friendship, I knew whatever he had found through that basement window, it was exactly as bad as the worst version of this I had let myself imagine. Maybe worse. Tristan. Hunter's voice was barely above a whisper. I found her. I sat up straight on my bunk, every nerve in my body suddenly awake. Is she okay? Hunter, talk to me. She's alive. A breath, shaky. But Tristan, I need you to stay calm for what I'm about to tell you, because I am not calm right now, and I need to make a call in about 90 seconds, and I need you breathing steady on this line while I do it. I'm steady, I said, and somehow, impossibly, I was. 11 years of training had carved that steadiness into me whether I wanted it tonight or not. Tell me what you saw, he told me. He'd gone around the side of the house, past the garden, to that small basement window I remembered from childhood. It was covered by an old wooden lattice panel, the kind meant to hide an air conditioning unit. Easy to overlook, unless you knew exactly where to look. Hunter knew. He moved the panel aside and crouched down to the window. The basement light was on, dim, just one bulb, and in the corner, on a thin mattress on the bare concrete floor, sat Brooke. She had her knees pulled up to her chest. Her hair was unwashed, pulled back loose. She looked thinner than the photograph Hunter remembered from our wedding 2 years ago, not gaunt, not in immediate danger, but worn down in a way that made his chest tighten the moment he saw her. There was a small bucket near the mattress, a blanket, a bottle of water, mostly empty. 9 days. She had been down there for 9 days. When Hunter tapped lightly on the glass, Brooke's head snapped up, eyes wide with a fear that took a full second to dissolve into recognition. Hunter, she mouthed, barely audible even through the glass. Tears immediately filled her eyes. I'm calling for help, he mouthed back, already pulling out his phone. Hold on, just hold on. The 911 call took 6 minutes to connect police to that address. Hunter stayed by that window the entire time, talking quietly to Brooke through the glass, telling her she was almost out, telling her Tristan knew, telling her she was done nothing wrong. Officer Quentin was the first to arrive. A patrol officer, mid-30s, the kind of methodical, no-nonsense presence that I would come to be deeply grateful for in the weeks ahead. He didn't wait for backup before approaching the front door. Kendra answered with the same warm, practiced smile Hunter had seen the day before. It evaporated the moment Quentin stated why he was there. There's one in the basement, she said immediately. I don't know what this young man thinks he saw, but ma'am, I have a welfare check report and a witness who observed a woman matching your daughter-in-law's description in distress, in your basement, less than 20 minutes ago. I need to see the basement now, or I will be returning with a warrant within the hour. Kendra's jaw tightened. Behind her, in the hallway, Daphne appeared, pale, silent, watching everything with an expression Quentin would later describe in his report as visibly distressed, possibly relieved. Giselle and Morgan came down a moment later. Neither said a word. Kendra led the officer to the basement door herself, still talking. Something about Brooke needing rest, needing quiet, having episodes that required her own space. But Quentin had stopped listening by the time he reached the bottom of those stairs. Brooke was carried out of that house at 12:40 in the morning. She was conscious, dehydrated, weak on her feet, but able to walk with support. The paramedics checked her over at the scene before transporting her for a full evaluation. No broken bones, no severe physical injury beyond the toll 9 days of confinement takes on a person's body. Malnutrition, dehydration, bruising on her wrists, faint where she had apparently tried the basement door more than once before giving up. The deeper damage wasn't visible on any chart. Hunter rode with her in the ambulance because she asked him to, gripping his hand the entire way, repeating the same 2 words over and over, until the sedative they gave her finally let her rest. Tell Tristan. Tell Tristan. He called me the moment she was settled and asleep in a hospital bed, monitored, safe, finally safe, and he told me everything. The window, the mattress, the bucket, the 9 days, the family standing in that hallway saying nothing, while a police officer walked past them toward the basement door. I sat on the edge of my bunk in a barracks 7,000 miles away, and I did not cry, and I did not shout, and I did not break anything. I went very, very quiet. Tristan, Hunter said, after a long silence on the line, say something. I'm filing for emergency leave first thing tomorrow morning, I said. My voice came out steady, flat, controlled in a way that almost scared me. I'm coming home. And then what? I looked at the small, folded letter still sitting on the shelf above my bunk. I love you. Come home to me. And then, I said, I'm going to find out exactly why my family thought they could do this to my wife, and believe there would never be a cost. I hung up the phone. I did not sleep that night either, but for the first time in 9 days, the silence in my chest had stopped feeling like fear. It had started feeling like a plan. Emergency leave came through in 18 hours. I have never moved faster through paperwork in my entire career. My commanding officer took one look at my face when I explained what happened and signed off without a single extra question. Some things don't need explaining twice to another man who spent his life in uniform. I landed at 6 a.m., exhausted in a way sleep wasn't going to fix, and went straight to the hospital. Brooke was awake when I walked into her room. She looked smaller than I remembered, pale, and foreign her arm. A blanket pulled up to her chest, eyes that found me the second I stepped through the door, and just held there like she needed to confirm I was real, before she let herself react. Then she broke. I crossed that room and held her as carefully as I knew how. And she cried into my shoulder the way she hadn't let herself cry in 9 days locked alone in a basement. And I didn't say anything for a long time, because there was nothing I could say that would undo what had already happened. I'm sorry, she said eventually into my shoulder. For what? For not fighting harder, for just... She pulled back enough to look at me, eyes red, voice small. For sitting there, for letting them. Brooke, I held her face in my hands. You didn't let them do anything, they did this. That's the only fact that matters. She nodded, but I could see she didn't fully believe it yet. That belief was going to take time I intended to give her. I asked her gently what she remembered about how it started. She told me about finding the discrepancy in our joint account. Small transfers. Amounts that didn't match anything we'd authorized, moved out before she could trace them further. She told me she'd brought it to Kendra carefully, not accusing, just asking, the way she did everything. Kendra's face had changed the moment Brooke said the word account. She told me I was confused, Brooke said. Said I should let her handle the household finances, since I clearly didn't understand them. I told her I just wanted to understand where the money went. That's all I asked. Her hands tightened on the blanket. That night she told me I needed some time to calm down in the basement. I thought she meant an hour, maybe 2, 9 days. I left the hospital that afternoon and drove straight to my mother's house. I want to be clear about something, because it matters for everything that came after. I did not go there to shout. I did not go there to put my hands on anyone. 11 years as a Marine taught me that the men who win are rarely the loudest in the room. Kendra opened the door like nothing had happened, like I was visiting for a holiday. Tristan, you should have called ahead, sweetheart. We need to talk about Brooke. Her face arranged itself into careful concern. I know this looks bad, but you have to understand, she was having some kind of episode. Paranoid, talking about money that doesn't exist, accusing this family of things. She was locked in a basement for 9 days. She wouldn't stay calm any other way. I stood on that porch and looked at the woman who raised me, and I felt something inside me go completely still. Not rage, not yet. Something colder and more patient than rage. I'm going to find out exactly what happened, I said. All of it. Tristan, there's nothing to find. This is a family matter. It stopped being a family matter the moment a police officer walked into that basement. I turned and left before she could say another word. That evening I met with Grant, an old friend now working in law enforcement, someone I trusted enough to ask the questions I couldn't ask through normal channels. Officer Quinton's report is solid, Grant told me over coffee. Unlawful confinement, at minimum. The DA's office will look at it seriously given the 9-day duration and the witness account. What about the money? Brooke said this started over a discrepancy in our account. Grant leaned back. If there's something there, fraud, theft, forged signatures, that's a separate trail entirely. Bigger usually than people expect once you start pulling at it. He studied me for a second. You think this was really about money? I thought about Kendra's face the moment Brooke said the word account, the speed of it. The basement door locking that same night. I think the basement wasn't the punishment, I said slowly. I think the basement was about making sure she never finished asking the question. Grant didn't respond right away. He just nodded slow, like a man who had seen this particular shape of trouble before and knew exactly how deep it usually went. Then let's find out what she was about to find, he said. Grant pulled bank records the legal way, through a formal request tied to the open criminal complaint, nothing that could be challenged later in court. 3 days after our coffee meeting, he called me with something that made everything click into place at once. Tristan, the joint account you and Brooke kept for emergencies. There's a pattern going back almost 2 years. Small transfers, always under $500. Always just beneath the threshold that triggers automatic fraud alerts. Moved into a separate account held jointly by your mother and your sister Giselle. 2 years, I repeated. Brooke only found this a few weeks ago. Because whoever set it up was careful, small amounts, spaced out, easy to miss unless someone was actually looking line by line. Grant paused. There's something else. Your hazard pay deployment bonus from 18 months ago. It shows a deposit into that same account, authorized by a signature. My signature. That's what it says on the form. I sat there holding the phone, feeling something settle into place that was worse, somehow, than anything I'd imagined. I never signed that form, Grant. I was in the field when that bonus processed. I didn't even see the paperwork until I got back. I know, Grant said quietly. That's why I already sent the form to a document examiner. Name's Victor. He's good. Testified in 3 federal fraud cases. He'll be able to tell us within a week if that signature is forged. I drove to the hospital that evening to see Brooke, turning the timeline over and over in my head. 2 years of small transfers, a forged signature on my own deployment bonus, and 9 days ago, Brooke had asked one simple, gentle question about a discrepancy in our account, and within hours, she was locked in a basement. It wasn't about a few $100s moving around. It was about what she might find if she kept looking. I didn't tell Brooke everything yet. She was still healing, still flinching at sounds that reminded her of that basement door, and I wasn't going to load the full weight of this onto her until I had something solid enough to act on. But I asked her one careful question. When you found the discrepancy, did you mention to anyone in the house exactly what you'd found? Specific numbers, dates, anything like that? She thought about it, brow furrowing. I told Kendra I'd noticed transfers I didn't recognize going back a while. I didn't have exact numbers yet. I was still gathering them when her voice caught slightly, when she stopped me. Did you write any of it down? Keep notes anywhere. Brooke's eyes widened slightly. Yes, in my phone, a notes file with the dates I'd found so far. Her face went pale. Tristan, my phone. They took my phone the first night. I never got it back. I felt something cold move through my chest. She hadn't just found a discrepancy, she'd been actively documenting it, building exactly the kind of evidence that would have exposed everything the night before she disappeared into that basement. Victor's analysis came back 6 days later. Grant met me in a small office downtown, just the two of us and a stack of documents spread across a table. Victor walked me through it with the patient precision of a man who had explained this exact kind of betrayal to exactly this kind of stunned family member many times before. The signature on the hazard pay authorization doesn't match your verified signature samples in 11 specific characteristics, Victor said, pointing to enlarged photographs of both signatures side by side. Pressure points, letter formation, the way you connect your T and your L. This was forged. Not a brilliant forgery, competent but not someone with formal training. Can you tell who wrote it? Not definitively from the signature alone, but in a. He slid another document across the table. We cross-referenced handwriting samples from the household's known residents through a separate civil filing related to the confinement case. Your sister Giselle's handwriting shows the same 11 characteristics in her known signature. I sat back slowly. Giselle, not just present in that house, not just silent in that hallway the night Brooke was carried out, actively forging documents to redirect money that belonged to me and to Brooke. This wasn't your mother acting alone, Grant said quietly. This was a system, multiple people, multiple roles, running for at least 2 years before Brooke ever noticed anything was wrong. I thought about Brooke's gentle question across that kitchen table. I just wanted to understand where the money went. She had no idea when she asked that question just how far down the truth actually went, or how many people in that house had a reason to make sure she never finished asking it. What's our next move? I said. Victor and Grant exchanged a glance. Now, Grant said, we find out exactly how deep this goes, quietly, before anyone in that house realizes we already know. There is a lesson they teach early in the Marine Corps that has nothing to do with weapons or tactics, and it is the one lesson that mattered most in the weeks that followed. The man who reacts first is usually the man who loses control of the situation. The man who waits, who watches, who lets the other side believe they are still winning. That man controls everything that happens next. I did not confront my mother again. I did not call Giselle and accuse her of forgery. I did not let a single word slip to Daphne, Morgan, or Ophelia that would suggest I knew anything beyond what the police report already stated. I went quiet, and in that quiet, I went to work. Grant connected me with a private investigator he trusted, a careful woman who specialized in financial cases, just like this one. Over the following 2 weeks, a clearer picture began forming, one piece at a time, each one confirmed before we moved to the next, exactly the way I'd been trained to clear a room. The joint account Kendra and Giselle controlled had received steady transfers for nearly 2 years, not just from Brooks and my emergency fund. Smaller amounts had been pulled from accounts belonging to Morgan and Ophelia as well, dressed up as household contributions that the 2 younger sisters had agreed to, without fully understanding where the money actually went after it left their hands. That detail changed something for me. It meant this wasn't simply Kendra against Brooke. It was Kendra and Giselle running something that even some of my own sisters didn't fully understand they were part of. Victor's forensic work continued in parallel. He confirmed 2 more forged signatures tied to additional transfers, both matching Giselle's handwriting patterns. Combined with the original hazard pay forgery, Victor said the pattern was now strong enough to stand up in front of a judge without much room for alternative explanation. This is enough to bring to a prosecutor, Grant told me, sitting across from me at his kitchen table one evening, files spread out between us. Fraud, forgery, and the unlawful confinement charge already in motion from Officer Quinnan's report. Separately, each is serious. Together, this is the kind of case that ends with real consequences. Then, let's bring it to a prosecutor, I said. Brooke was moved home from the hospital around this time. Not to my mother's house, obviously, but to a small rental Hunter helped me arrange near the base, somewhere Brooke could feel safe with locks she controlled, and a door only she and I had keys to. She was healing, slowly. The physical part came back faster than I expected. Color in her face, weight she'd lost during those 9 days, strength in her hands and her steps. The other part, the part that flinched at the sound of a door closing too firmly, the part that sometimes went quiet in the middle of a sentence and stared at nothing for a few seconds before coming back. That part needed more time than any of us could rush. I kept most of the legal details away from her in those early weeks. Not because I didn't trust her with them, but because she had enough weight to carry just getting through each day, and I had decided that my job, my actual job in all of this, was to carry the rest so she didn't have to. She noticed anyway, Brooke was never as fragile as the family that locked her in a basement believed her to be. "You're building something," she said one evening, watching me close my laptop a little too quickly when she walked into the room. "Aren't you?" I considered lying. I didn't. "Yes," I said. "Tell me." "So," I told her, "not everything, not yet, not the full financial picture because some of it was still being confirmed, and I wasn't going to hand her uncertainty when she'd already survived 9 days of it. But I told her about the forged signature, about Giselle's handwriting, about the money moving for 2 years before she ever asked her first gentle question across that kitchen table. Brooke sat very still for a long moment after I finished. She locked me in a basement, Brooke said quietly, because I was about to find out she'd been stealing from us for 2 years. Yes, not because she thought I was confused, not because I was having some kind of episode. Her voice hardened slightly, something steadier coming into it that I hadn't heard since before any of this happened. Because I was right. You were right? I confirmed. She nodded slowly, processing that, and something shifted visibly across her face. Not relief exactly, but the particular strength that comes when a person realizes the thing they survived wasn't their fault in any version of the story, no matter how the people responsible tried to spin it. 2 days later, Grant arranged the meeting with the prosecutor. Her name was Paige, sharp, direct, the kind of attorney who asked exactly the right follow-up question every single time and wrote almost nothing down because she was clearly retaining every detail without needing to. She reviewed Victor's forensic report, the financial trail, Officer Quinton's original confinement report, and Brooke's preliminary statement over the course of 90 minutes without interrupting once. When she finished, she set the last folder down and looked directly at me. "This is a strong case," Paige said. "The confinement charge alone, with a 9-day duration and a credible eyewitness account, will be difficult for any defense to minimize. Combined with the financial fraud and forgery evidence," she tapped Victor's report, "we're looking at multiple felony charges and likely multiple defendants. Not just your mother." "How many people are we talking about?" I asked. Paige considered the file in front of her. "Based on what's here, your mother, almost certainly, your sister Giselle, given the forgery evidence. The other 2 who were present in that house during the confinement may face lesser charges, depending on what we can establish about their direct involvement versus their awareness." I thought about Daphne's face and Hunter's description, pale, distressed, possibly relieved when the police arrived. I thought about Morgan's silence in that hallway. I thought about Ophelia, barely 20, the youngest of them all. 4 sisters, 1 mother, 2 years of careful, quiet theft, and 9 days that none of them would ever be able to undo. "What happens now?" I asked. Paige closed the folder in front of her. "Now," she said, "we build this carefully enough that nothing falls apart in court, and we find out exactly which of those 4 sisters knew what, because I suspect they don't all know the same things." I thought about that sentence for a long time after I left her office. 4 sisters, not 4 equal participants. Somewhere in that house, I suspected, there was at least one person who had been as trapped by my mother's control as Brooke had been trapped in that basement. Just trapped in a different way, for a great deal longer. I intended to find out exactly who that was. It happened on a quiet Sunday evening, almost a month after Hunter found her through that basement window. We were sitting on the small back porch of the rental house, the kind of warm evening where the air doesn't move much, and the only sound is the occasional car passing on the street out front. Brooke had been quiet most of the day, the particular kind of quiet I had learned to recognize, not sad exactly, just somewhere far away, working through something internally before she was ready to bring it to the surface. "I want to tell you everything," she said suddenly, "about the basement, all of it. I've been giving you pieces, but I don't think that's fair to you. You deserve to know." I set down the glass of water in my hand and gave her my full attention. "Only if you're ready." "I don't think I'll ever feel ready," she said, "but I think I need to say it out loud to someone who actually loves me instead of just to a police report." "So," she told me. She told me about the first night, how she genuinely believed it was temporary, an hour, maybe 2, a punishment meant to make a point that would end as soon as Kendra felt the point had landed. She told me about the second night, when she realized the door wasn't opening on anyone's schedule but Kendra's, and a small, sick feeling that started low in her stomach and never fully left. She told me about counting days using scratch marks on the underside of the mattress, hidden where no one would think to look. About the silence stretching so long between meals that she started rationing the small amount of food she was given, unsure when the next plate would come. About the moments, and there were several, she admitted, her voice dropping lower, when she genuinely believed no one was ever coming for her, that I might never even know what had happened, that she would simply disappear from her own life, and the story the family told afterward would be the only one that survived. "I thought about you the whole time," she said, eyes fixed somewhere past me, somewhere in the memory itself. "Every single day I kept thinking, if I can just hold on until Tristan comes home, he'll fix this. He'll know what to do. She looked at me then, eyes wet but steady. I built my entire hope around you walking through a door I didn't know if you'd ever reach in time. I felt something crack open in my chest hearing that. Not pain exactly, something closer to the full weight of responsibility landing all at once. I'm sorry I wasn't there, I said quietly. I will spend a long time being sorry about that. You came as fast as a person could come, Brooke said. I know that now. In the basement, I didn't know anything. I just knew I needed to believe you were coming, because the alternative was unbearable. I told her something in return that I had never fully said out loud to anyone, not even to her in 2 years of marriage. I told her about why I became a Marine in the first place. Not the recruitment poster version, not the version I gave at family barbecues, the real one. I told her about growing up in that house, watching my mother control every dollar, every decision, every relationship under her roof with a quiet, absolute authority that none of us ever had the language to name as wrong when we were young. I told her that joining the Marines had been, in some way I hadn't fully understood until I said it out loud right then, my own way of escaping a house where control mattered more than honesty. I left that house to become someone who protects people instead of controlling them, I said. And the whole time I was overseas doing exactly that for strangers, the people I trusted most were doing the opposite to the person I loved most. Brooke reached over and took my hand. You didn't do this, Tristan. I know, but I'm the one who's going to finish it. She studied my face for a long moment, something careful coming into her expression. I need you to promise me something, she said. Anything. Don't let this turn you into someone you'd be ashamed of. I know what you're capable of. The training, the discipline, all of it. I need you to use the law, the courts, Paige, whatever it takes through the right channels. Her grip on my hand tightened slightly. I didn't survive 9 days in that basement just to lose you to a prison sentence because you decided to handle this yourself. I held her eyes and gave her the only answer I had ever intended to give. I promise you, I said, everything happening from here goes through Paige, through the courts, through evidence that holds up in front of a judge. No shortcuts, nothing that puts me anywhere but standing beside you when this is finished. She studied my face for a long moment, searching for any crack in that promise. She didn't find one because there wasn't one to find. Okay, she said softly, then I trust you completely. We sat together as the evening settled fully into night, her hands still in mine. The quiet between us finally feeling like peace instead of fear, for the first time since Hunter's call had come through, on a base 7,000 miles away. It was the first night since this began that Brooke fell asleep before midnight. I stayed awake a while longer, watching her breathe steady beside me, thinking about everything Paige had said about 4 sisters who might not all know the same things. Somewhere in that house, I still believed, was someone carrying guilt heavy enough to eventually need somewhere to put it down. I intended to be ready when that moment came. Paige moved methodically over the following 3 weeks, the way I imagine a good Marine officer plans an operation. Every step confirmed before the next one begins. Nothing rushed, nothing left exposed. She brought in attorney Julian to formally represent Brooke's interests in the civil side of the case, while the criminal charges built in parallel. Julian was sharp, unhurried, the kind of man who read every document twice before he said a single word about it. The confinement charge stands on its own, Julian told us during our first meeting. Brooke seated beside me, her hands steady in her lap in a way that would have seemed impossible a month earlier. 9 days, a credible witness, a responding officer's report, medical documentation of dehydration and malnutrition. That's airtight regardless of what happens with the financial case. And the fraud? I asked. That's where it gets more complicated and more serious. Julian opened a folder. Victor's forensic analysis on the forged signatures is strong. Combined with the financial trail grants investigator pulled, we're looking at a pattern of fraud spanning roughly 2 years, multiple victims within the same family, and at least one party, Giselle, directly responsible for the forgeries. What about the others? Brooke asked quietly. Daphne, Morgan, Ophelia. Julian glanced at Paige before answering. That's still being established. Paige's office is working on that exact question right now. Daphne was the one who finally answered it. I learned later, through Paige, exactly how it happened, and the picture that emerged was nothing like what I expected. Daphne had been quietly unraveling since the night police carried Brooke out of that basement. She had barely spoken at family gatherings since, according to Hunter, who still had occasional contact with people in town who knew the family. She stopped answering Kendra's calls as frequently as she used to. She started going for long drives alone, the kind of behavior that doesn't draw much attention until someone is specifically watching for it. What none of us knew yet was that Daphne had been recording things, quietly, carefully, for months, long before Brooke ever asked her first question about the joint account. Paige's office received an anonymous tip through a secure reporting line, someone requesting to speak with the prosecutor handling the Cole family case, refusing to give a name at first, asking only whether information could be provided in a way that protected the person providing it. Paige recognized immediately what kind of call this likely was, and arranged a careful, attorney-mediated meeting. It was Daphne. I wasn't in the room for that meeting, and I'm grateful I wasn't, because Paige told me afterward that Daphne cried through most of it. She told Paige that she had spent years watching her mother control every part of the household. Money, relationships, even small daily decisions dressed up as guidance, but functioning as absolute authority. She said Giselle had become, over time, an extension of that control, willing to do whatever Kendra asked in exchange for a kind of favored status the other three sisters never had. She said she had started recording conversations almost a year earlier, not because she had a plan, but because some instinct told her that one day she would need proof that she had not agreed with what was happening, even if she had been too afraid to stop it. I want to be clear, Daphne told Paige. According to the notes I was eventually shown, I didn't lock that door, I didn't forge anything, but I stood in that hallway and said nothing while it happened, and I have to live with that. I can't undo what I didn't do, but I can stop pretending I don't know what actually happened. She handed over a phone containing 11 recorded conversations spanning 9 months. Several of them involved Kendra explicitly discussing the diverted funds. One, recorded just 2 days before Brooke disappeared into that basement, captured Kendra telling Giselle that Brooke was getting too close, and that something needed to happen too, by some time before this gets out of hand. It was the clearest evidence anyone had produced yet that the confinement had never been about an episode, a stomach bug, or a misunderstanding. It had been planned. Paige called Julian and me in together once the recordings had been authenticated. This changes the case considerably, Paige said, sliding a transcript across the table. We're no longer looking at confinement as a reactive, isolated decision. This establishes premeditation. Combined with the fraud evidence, your mother is facing significantly more serious charges than she would have otherwise. And Giselle? I asked. Conspiracy, forgery, and likely participation in the confinement itself, given what's on these recordings. Paige looked at me steadily. Daphne, given her cooperation and her limited direct involvement, is a different conversation. My office is prepared to discuss reduced exposure for her in exchange for her continued cooperation and testimony. I sat with that for a long moment. Daphne, quiet, watchful Daphne, the one who had answered Hunter's first knock at that door with fear in her eyes, had spent nearly a year building the very evidence that would now bring the whole structure down. What about Morgan and Ophelia? Brooke asked. Still under review. Paige said, the recordings suggest they had limited awareness of the financial fraud, though there's evidence they were present during the planning conversation about the confinement itself. We're determining the appropriate charges for each individually, based on what we can establish. I thought about that house, about 4 sisters living under one roof, one mother controlling every thread between them, and how differently each of them had ultimately responded once the structure started to crack. Daphne had chosen, quietly and at real risk to herself, to document the truth. I intended to make sure that choice counted for something when this was finally over. I assumed, when Paige first told me about the recordings, that I understood the full shape of what had happened. I assumed Daphne's cooperation was simply the natural result of guilt, finally outweighing fear. I was only partly right. The full picture came out a week later, and it came out not through Paige's office, not through Julian, not through any formal channel at all. It came out because Brooke picked up the phone. Daphne had reached out to her directly, not to me, not to Paige. To Brooke, the one person in this entire story she had wronged most directly by her silence, the one person with every reason to refuse the call entirely. Brooke told me about it that evening, sitting across from me at our small kitchen table, her voice careful in the way it got, when was still working through how she felt about something. She called while you were at the base today, Brooke said. I almost didn't answer. I saw the number and my hands started shaking, before I even picked up. What did she want? To apologize. Not the kind of apology Kendra would give. Not an excuse wrapped up to look like remorse. She just kept saying she was sorry over and over, and then she started crying so hard she could barely talk. I waited, letting Brooke get to it in her own time. She told me things, Tristan, things that weren't in any recording or any report. Brooke's eyes were distant for a moment, somewhere back in that phone call. She told me Kendra has controlled her entire life since she was a teenager. Every choice, where she worked, who she dated, how much of her own paycheck she was allowed to keep. She said Giselle figured out early that going along with whatever Kendra wanted bought her freedom the rest of them never had, and the more compliant Giselle became, the more Kendra used her to manage the other three, and Daphne went along with it because she was afraid. Terrified, Brooke said quietly. She told me she started recording those conversations almost a year ago because some part of her knew, even then, that eventually she'd need proof that she hadn't agreed with everything happening in that house, even if she'd never found the courage to actually stop it. Brooke looked up at me. She said the night they locked that basement door, she stood in the hallway and felt like she was watching herself become exactly the kind of person who lets terrible things happen because objecting felt more dangerous than staying quiet. I sat with that for a long moment, turning it over. Why call you? I asked. Why not Paige again, or me? Because she said I was the only person in this whole situation she actually owed an apology to directly. Brooke's voice softened. She said the recordings might help the case, but they wouldn't undo what happened to me, and she needed to say that to my face, or my voice at least, before she could let herself feel like the cooperation actually meant anything. I studied my wife across that small kitchen table, watching her process something I knew was complicated even for someone with as much grace as she carried. What do you feel? I asked. About her? Brooke considered the question seriously before answering. I don't forgive her, she said slowly. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. She stood in a hallway while I was locked in a basement, and no amount of secret recordings made a year ago changes the fact that she didn't open that door. She paused. But I believe she's genuinely sorry. And I believe she was as trapped by that family as I was, just in a slower, quieter way that took her years instead of 9 days. Brooke met my eyes. I think there's a difference between forgiving someone and understanding that they were also a victim of the same person who victimized you. I'm not there with the first thing. I think I might eventually be there with the second. What Brooke decided to do next surprised even me. She asked Daphne to provide a full, formal statement to Paige's office. Not just the recordings, but a complete account of everything she'd witnessed over the years, including details about how Kendra had controlled and manipulated all 4 sisters individually. Brooke didn't do this out of anger. She did it because she recognized, with a clarity that humbled me, that Daphne's testimony could help establish exactly how deliberate and prolonged Kendra's control had been, which mattered not just for the confinement charge, but for protecting Morgan and Ophelia from being treated by the court as equally complicit when their own involvement had clearly been shaped by years of the same pressure Daphne described. She's not asking for anything in return, Brooke told me. She just wants this to be over, and she wants it to be over the right way, not with everyone treated the same when they weren't all equally responsible. Paige, when Brooke relayed the offer, agreed almost immediately. A formal statement, given voluntarily and corroborated by the existing recordings, made Daphne one of the strongest witnesses in the entire case, and gave the prosecution exactly what it needed to differentiate the 4 sisters' culpability clearly in front of a judge. It hadn't been Tristan's pressure, or Grant's investigation, or even Victor's forensic analysis that produced this final, crucial piece. It had been Brooke's willingness, even after everything, to see the difference between cruelty and fear dressed up as compliance. I had spent 11 years learning how to fight. Watching my wife make that distinction, sitting across a kitchen table from me with the same gentleness that had gotten her locked in a basement in the first place, I understood for the first time that there was a kind of strength I hadn't fully respected until I saw it up close. The case was complete now, every piece in place. What remained was the courtroom. The trial took place 11 weeks after Hunter first looked through that basement window. I wore my dress uniform that day, not for show. Julian had simply mentioned, almost in passing, that juries and judges tend to notice when a Marine stands quietly behind his wife rather than beside her, letting her own voice carry the weight of the testimony instead of speaking over it. I understood what he meant the moment I sat down in that courtroom gallery. This case had never needed me to be loud. It needed me to be steady, present, and patient enough to let the truth do the work I'd spent 11 weeks building toward. Brooke sat beside Paige at the front, composed in a way that still occasionally amazed me given everything she'd survived. Paige built her case in careful order, the same methodical way she'd built everything from the beginning. She opened with Officer Quentin's testimony, straightforward, factual, describing exactly what he found when he walked down those basement stairs: the mattress, the bucket, the malnutrition documented by hospital staff within hours of Brooke's rescue. Victor then presented his forensic signature analysis to the judge with the same careful attention to detail he had shown me months before. The enlarged images of the forged signatures were so clear that even from the back of the courtroom, the differences were obvious. Then came the financial records, 2 years of transactions tracked and documented, with amounts small enough to evade easy detection until someone examined them closely enough to spot the pattern. Then the audio recordings were played, including Kendra's own voice discussing the misappropriated funds in the courtroom with such nonchalance that several jurors noticeably shifted in their seats. And then there was the recording from 2 days before Brooke was confined, Kendra's voice, composed and confident, telling Giselle that Brooke was getting too close and that something needed to be done to buy time. When that recording finished playing, the courtroom fell completely silent. Daphne was the third from last to testify. I saw her approach the stand, clearly anxious, her hands shaking slightly as she took her seat. But when she finally spoke, her voice was firmer than I anticipated. It was the voice of someone who had spent 11 weeks preparing for this exact moment, aware it would sever any remaining ties with the family that raised her. She detailed years of control, the financial constraints, the decisions imposed on her and her sisters without their consent, the gradual, deliberate manner in which Kendra had created a home where obedience seemed safer than truth for all its inhabitants. When the defense lawyer sharply asked why she hadn't acted to prevent the confinement if she opposed it so vehemently, Daphne paused for a long moment before replying. "I was scared," she admitted. "I've feared my mother all my life. I'm ashamed of standing in that hallway and remaining silent. I think about it daily. But fear doesn't imply consent to what occurred, nor does it mean I wasn't already working discreetly to ensure the truth would eventually surface." It was, I reflected, the most sincere response anyone had offered in that entire courtroom. Brooke was the last to take the stand. She recounted her time in the basement with careful precision, eschewing any exaggeration or dramatic flair, simply presenting the harsh reality of 9 days spent locked in a room beneath the home of those who were supposed to care for her. She spoke of how she had marked the passing days by scratching lines into the mattress. She shared the moments when she had been convinced that no one would ever come for her. When Paige questioned how she felt now, facing her captors in that courtroom, Brooke responded without a moment's delay. "I am not seeking revenge," she declared, her voice ringing out clear and steady throughout the entire room. "I am only asking that the truth be acknowledged precisely as it occurred, and that my family, and indeed everyone watching this case, understand that kindness is not equivalent to weakness, and that posing an honest question should never result in someone spending 9 days in a basement." The verdict was delivered 2 days afterward. Kendra was found guilty of unlawful confinement, conspiracy to commit fraud, and aggravated kidnapping, with the duration and premeditation confirmed by the recordings. The judge's sentence would keep her incarcerated for nearly 20 years. Giselle was convicted of forgery, fraud, and conspiracy, directly linked to the forged signatures and her active participation in planning the confinement. Her punishment was severe, yet considerably less than Kendra's, given the overwhelming evidence that Kendra had orchestrated the entire scheme. Morgan and Ophelia each pleaded to minor charges connected to their presence during the planning discussion. They received probation and mandatory counseling instead of jail time, as the court accepted that their involvement stemmed from years of psychological manipulation rather than genuine malice. Daphne, in acknowledgement of her cooperation and the crucial evidence she supplied, faced no charges related to the confinement itself, although she agreed to a civil settlement concerning the fraud case as part of the deal. As the final sentence was announced, Brooke reached over and grasped my hand tightly, and I felt 11 weeks of careful, patient discipline finally release its breath. It had not been a victory achieved through force. It had been exactly as I had promised her it would be. Through truth, through the law, through patience that had outlasted every lie that family had told to protect itself. On the first morning in our new home, Brooke was already in the kitchen when I woke. I found her at the counter preparing coffee, sunlight streaming through a window that was ours alone. For a moment, I simply stood in the doorway observing her. Her hands were steady, her shoulders relaxed, and she hummed softly under her breath, as if the kitchen itself was still uncertain whether it was permitted to feel normal again. We had relocated 20 minutes outside the city, a modest house, nothing extravagant. Yet every wall, every door, every lock was under no one's control but our own. "You're staring," Brooke said without looking back. "I'm allowed to stare at my own wife in my own kitchen," I replied. She smiled. A genuine one, effortless, the kind that hadn't appeared naturally in months, and that small gesture conveyed more about our progress than any courtroom verdict ever could. Brooke began therapy twice weekly with a counselor specializing in confinement cases. Her recovery wasn't linear. Some weeks were more challenging than the previous ones. Certain noises still caused her to startle, a door shutting too forcefully, the distinct sound of a deadbolt engaging. I learned not to hurry her through these episodes, but to remain nearby and allow her to return to the present at her own pace. Yet the woman who had once sincerely thanked waiters, who wept at others' weddings, who kept every letter I'd written her in a shoebox beneath our bed, she remained. In some ways, she was even more grounded now, having endured an ordeal that could have shattered her, and choosing each day not to let it dictate the rest of her existence. About 4 months after the trial concluded, Daphne reached out once more. Not to request anything, but simply to send Brooke a brief message inquiring how she was faring, carefully avoiding any pressure beyond what Brooke was prepared to offer. Brooke didn't respond immediately. She considered it for nearly a week, before finally replying with a short, sincere message of her own. She expressed appreciation for the inquiry, clarified that she wasn't ready for anything resembling a relationship, but also that she didn't harbor hatred. It wasn't forgiveness, Brooke made that clear, but it marked the start of something human between two women who had both, albeit in very different ways, endured the same household. I admired my wife more for that decision than for almost anything else she had done throughout this entire experience. It demonstrated her capacity to embrace complexity rather than forcing everything into a simple narrative of villains and victims. I had one final deployment scheduled, 8 months away. The evening before I needed to begin preparations, Brooke and I sat together on our new back porch, the one that belonged solely to us, and she reached over and took my hand, just as she had on the day the verdict was delivered. "I'm not afraid this time," she said, "not like I was before, because now I know precisely what I'm capable of enduring, and I know you'll return to a door whose key is held by no one else." She gazed at me steadily. "That's sufficient." I believed her. And for the first time since this entire ordeal had begun, I allowed myself to simply exist in that belief, without feeling compelled to plan, strategize, or prepare for potential disasters. From the ruins, we had constructed something new. Not the family I had known growing up, but something superior, something genuine. That was sufficient for the both of us. The tale is complete, but before you leave, I have a question, and I truly want your sincere response in the comments. If you were Brooke, facing Daphne after all that transpired, would you have replied to that message? Or would you have maintained the silence? I'm genuinely interested in your perspective, as I believe it reveals something authentic about each of us. Also, share with me, where in the world are you reading this from? Each time I ask, I'm astonished by the global reach. Share your city, your country, let me know you were present with us for this journey. There's one more aspect that truly matters to me. What type of narratives do you crave next? Betrayal from an unexpected source. A reserved individual finally pushed beyond their limits. A soldier returning to uncover a family secret. Inform me precisely what captivates you, because I craft these tales for you, not myself. Whatever you express in the comments, that's the exact kind of story I'll deliver next. If this one resonated with you as I believe it did, you understand what to do. Stay engaged, as the next narrative is already forming, and I assure you, it will be equally compelling, perhaps even more so. Until we meet again, cherish those who share truths with kindness. Sometimes, that gentleness is the most powerful force in the room. See you in the next story.